Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for part 2 of the Monday Q&As. So let's get it done. First question. Apparently when the NBA does its own kind of pre-draft combine, they measure body fat. Although the players are listed at 3 to 6%. I know this can't be correct, but how are they measuring this to get such extreme numbers? Well, I can assure you if they're coming up with athletes with 3 to 6%, they're doing purely skin fold and nothing else. Because the reality is oftentimes training itself, and these guys tend to do large volumes of endurance work. NBA is very much an endurance-based sport. So these are athletes who are doing a lot of endurance work. They're going to tend to have a little less subcutaneous fat compared to the rest of the fat on their body. It may not get rid of things like their visceral fat, intramuscular fat, things like that as much. So for them to really get anywhere near accurate, you probably need to go with something like a DEXA scan. So if they aren't giving them a DEXA scan, it probably isn't accurate. Most of these guys are probably 3 to 4% higher than what they're pulling off the skin folds, if not more. And again, if you look at the physiques of NBA players, there's a lot of guys out there in NBA who you'd put at 9 or 10%, maybe some of them 11% or so. That seems to be more the norm when you look at them visually. So again, this is just the hype. They're using skin folds, and they know the skin folds aren't accurate because they have real experts there. It's just so that it puts numbers up to present and look pretty. As kind of a dog and pony show. I'd take it with a grain of salt because that's all it is. All right, next question. Since your brain requires a lot of energy in day-to-day operations, will you burn more calories if it is under a lot of stress? And in people who work as lawyers, etc., if yes, could you actually lose weight from this? And could you call it exercise? All right, this is a bit of a misconception there, and this is because people don't understand how your brain operates and what it does. Not to say that even neurologists even fully understand how the brain works. But the thing that you need to remember with the brain, yes, humans have very large brains. We burn up to 25% of our base metabolic rate actually comes from our brain, not our entire body, 25%, approximately. The issue there is that people think that because they're thinking more or they have more emotions going on, that their brain is necessarily doing a lot more work. And it might be in certain regions of the brain, but the overwhelming majority of what your brain does on a day-to-day basis has nothing to do with your conscious thought up here in the frontal lobes, the stuff going on up there. It has to do with all the sensory input going on around the body, your body regulating every hormone, every cell, every nerve impulse through your entire body 24/7. It is regulating a lot of things, a tremendous amount of things, and that's what's taking all the energy. Your actual thoughts and things like that comprise a relatively small amount of what your brain does on a daily basis. So no, you can't really boost that significantly just by thinking a bit more or being stressed. But it is an interesting question nonetheless, so I felt like answering it anyways. All right, next question. Can training the pause squat exclusively, no regular squats for a long period of time, have a negative impact of squat strength? No, not at all. The only thing that you're really going to lose by doing the pause work is you're going to lose the skill of engaging the stretch reflex at the bottom, the myotatic reflex. But you're going to get overall stronger on the squat. And it's really easy. You can retrain that stretch reflex within 2 to 3 weeks to be right back where it was as a basic skill. So as long as you're progressing on the pause squat consistently, you should get complete carryover back to your normal squat using a stretch reflex as soon as you retrain the stretch reflex. So if your pause squat over time goes up 50 pounds, it's probably not unreasonable to expect that when you go back to doing the normal squat and you start re-engaging the stretch reflex, that once you relearn the skill, that your total squat will go up by the same amount. So there's not really a negative there other than you unlearn one of the skills, but it has a lot of other benefits to the pause squat. So for me, I like to train the pause squat a lot, and I recommend it regularly to people. All right, next question. Jason, does overtraining a certain muscle, which cannot be done, it's impossible, with progressive reps, one more rep each day until the end of the overtraining cycle for a month and then 2 to 3 days of not working it actually work? Or is this just some more glycogen in the muscle and not actual growth? This is difficult to answer. This really isn't being looked at correctly, and I hate it when people use the term overtraining like this. Overtraining is never a good thing. Overtraining is always a negative thing, and if you overtrain, you will suffer for it both in terms of your training, your muscle mass, your strength, and possibly even your health. Actually, overtraining can hurt you physically. So it's the wrong term to use here. And overtraining is a systematic process in the body that takes a long period of time to achieve, and it has nothing whatsoever to do with individual muscles. You can actually train a muscle to the point to where you inflame the connective tissue and rip it completely off the bone, and it's still not considered to be overtraining, because overtraining is a system-wide process. It's nothing to do with anything localized. What you're doing here is trying to do some sort of planned overreaching, but it's not really the most efficient way to do it, to just increase the reps one a day. You're just increasing workload, but you had to have started at a relatively low workload to be able to do that for any period of time, because your body doesn't adapt that fast unless you're a ranked novice. But could you push a muscle like that? You say you want to bring a muscle up, it's lagging a bit. Could you train it every day and keep pushing more and more volume on it for a month like that, and then take a few days off to let it finally recover and super compensate through like dual factor recovery models? Yeah, it's a viable method, absolutely viable method, and you will get some additional growth out of that. It may not be a lot more growth than you would have gotten. You might have been able to achieve 90 or 95% of that same growth in the month by doing something far, far less intense than that. But if you're trying to glean just a little more of an edge through some overreaching, then for something that's lagging in particular, you could do something like that and it would work, and it might give you just a little additional muscle growth. So it just depends on what your goals are and if it's really worth it to you to go through something like that. Just don't use the term overtraining with it. It's going to make you sound really, really ignorant. All right, next question. Starting strength versus strong lifts. What's your preference for infield athletes during the off season? I don't even see how this is a contest. Strong lifts was never intended as a real field athlete's training protocol. Strong lifts was invented by a guy for bodybuilders. He took the bodybuilding 5x5 setup, which had been very, very famous for a long time. Tons of very successful bodybuilders back in the 60s and 70s used 5x5 protocols as their big chunks of their training. But he trimmed it way down to make it a trendy minimalist setup. So he cut most of the exercises out and just left some of the basic stuff in, and it's a good way to build a decent strength base and size base, although you're going to have a lot of lagging muscles and imbalances if that's all you do. But it's not really intended for infield athletes, whereas in starting strength was not intended for any other purpose. Starting strength was written very specifically for field athletes and strength athletes who perform out in the field. So football players, rugby players, people like that, those were the intended target demographic of starting strength, and it was written by a professional coach. So clearly this is the better choice, because that is the specific program for that application. Now, do I think strong lifts has enough volume? Probably not. A lot of other strength athletes are going to want to add other exercises and accessory work into it. But as far as covering your strength basis for a field athlete, I think it's a very fine, very proven, successful program for that purpose. It's clearly the only choice out of the two if you had to pick between the two for this purpose. All right, next question. What do you do when you go to your training in the gym and you totally bomb on everything? If you go into the gym and you're having one of those days where you're just bombing everything, it's time to step back and reassess what you're doing. You should probably step back. Just go ahead and leave the gym. You probably need to get some extra sleep, get some extra calories in, maybe take the next day off to the gym, let your body rest, and then reassess what's going on with your training. You've missed something in your training cycle, or something in your lifestyle has really messed up your recovery. So you need a break, step back, take a breath. Next day, don't train at all. Reassess what you've been doing and see if you can change your game plan to allow yourself to adapt better, because something is clearly wrong and you don't need to be in the gym that day or the next day if that happens. All right, next question. Alternating front squats with back squats, Reg Parks-style on strong lifts 5x5 to make up for stronger back, weaker quads and abs. I don't really understand where you're going here. The front squat doesn't work the quads any more than the high bar squat does, the regular Olympic squat. It works the back more, your thoracic region and your core to some extent. So yeah, if you wanted a stronger core, okay, maybe I could see why you would use the front squat for that, but it is more of a back exercise than it does improve quad work over the high bar. So that doesn't make any sense at all. Now, I'm not saying you couldn't do this successfully. I mean, if you wanted to run strong lifts and alternate them like that and give it a try, more power to you. It's not unreasonable. I mean, again, that's an old school method that was used successfully in the past, but don't think it's going to make your quads grow anymore. The front squat simply doesn't work the quads anymore, because any extra shift that you're getting as far as the angles that are working the quads more are being offset by the reduced intensity and weight. So it's not necessarily going to help you anymore there, but it is a little better for certain parts of your core, and definitely like your thoracic region and your back, it is a better exercise for those. And that isn't necessarily a bad idea if you want a little more balanced strength, considering that strong lifts does have fairly low amounts of upper back work, and the deadlift volume is low. Alternating the front squats might help your deadlift come up more quickly. So give it a try. It's not an unreasonable approach if that's what you want to do. Just understand why you're doing it. It's not doing completely what you think it is. All right, next question and last question of the week. Why don't you recommend that we supplement zinc? Is it just a male libido myth? I don't recommend that you supplement any sort of metal without really understanding what you're doing. Most of your vitamins and phytonutrients, they're fine, but when we start getting into minerals, you get to a point to where people don't grasp when they start taking all these minerals and metals and things, is that when you observe certain amounts of these substances, they actually can negatively affect your body's ability to absorb others. So for most people, if you're not zinc deficient, you're not going to see any sort of testosterone boost or anything like that people think you're going to get from zinc. You're not going to see it at all. And most people are not zinc deficient, particularly people who are eating meat and a lot of other things like that. Odds that you're zinc deficient is fairly low if you're on a decent balanced diet. So when you start adding zinc in, what ends up happening is that you start blocking your body's ability to absorb copper to some extent. So by taking too much zinc, you could, in the long term, if you took enough of it, you could risk zinc toxicity, and that could hurt you and could cause organ damage. But that's not that likely. What is more likely to happen is that supplementing too much zinc when you're already getting enough could block your ability to absorb copper, and then you could develop a copper deficiency over time, which could impact your health, your recovery, and all sorts of other issues. So it has a potential negative there that people aren't really factoring in, and that's always the risk when you start supplementing metals in supplement form. You need to keep that in mind, that not only is there a toxicity issue, but a lot of them interfere. When you take too much of one, it can interfere with your body's ability to actually absorb and utilize another. And you can create a dietary imbalance that way really easily. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time. But let me give you guys a bicep shot before I go. Oh, Mount Bicepius.